Ladybug Arts Center in Springfield, Missouri presents Painting with Shirley Wilson. In our lesson today, we'll be visiting Snuggle Inn, a comfy place to spend some time with your painting friends.
Oh boy, when does the movie start?
Thank you for joining us today. Our subject that we're painting is the sweet old bear. I made it into an inn sign because I think bears would be very good innkeepers. They like to sleep a lot and be comfortable. I've brought the sketch that we did earlier just because I think it's so interesting to see it in black and white and just to see where the values are and get the feel for what the painting is going to be like. This particular sketch, after I finished it, I decided that he needed a little more room right in here and a little room for his tummy to show, so I've changed it just slightly as I've come to the painting surface. Our surface that we're painting on is stained, just in a wood stain, and I have placed pattern on for the oval and for the outline of the bear, just a little detail on the bear. I like to block that in before I get too involved in pattern in order to be able to fill in the rest of the pattern. I'm going to leave my pattern tape just firmly along one side so that it's always there and properly aligned when I need it. Then I'll fold it back and we can start the painting. I've begun with the tinted area behind the bear, the sky area that sort of makes the bear come forward. I'm using a nice large brush and just some short, choppy little strokes to fill in. Not worrying too much about covering the background. I like this irregular look that I get. If I just let it fill in, but not completely, knowing that I can come back with layers later on, and each layer tends to smooth and add interest. As I get close to the little bear, I'm letting just very casual edge. I don't want a crisp outline there because that's what makes the bear look furry, is if he has this messy sort of outer edge. The hallmark of my painting is that the edges are usually always messy, but I like it that way. So. And I'm stroking in just a little bit of highlight here and there, just to add interest to the background. I specifically don't want to completely outline him, but I want to just add interest in a few places near him. Then I'm going to look at the bear. What I've traced on, he has ears and a little muzzle and his paws, but I've left the facial detail for later because I know if I put it on now, I'll start to tighten up and I won't get that loose, relaxed feeling that I'd like to have. And I want something that's just going to be just a little lighter than the background that I've got here. Our light source is coming from the upper left today, so I'm thinking about where the light would hit. If, for instance, there were just a little light trained on the painting, and so it might hit a little bit along the top of an ear. Might hit a little bit over here on this ear. And this entire side of his face here could get a little bit coming into light. And I'll just continue that feeling on, down onto the paws. We've got them resting so comfortably. And then I've given him a little bit of a tummy because bears are big eaters. They like to be like me. They like to eat and then go to sleep. Paintings can look so casual in the beginning, very loose, and often that makes the best painting. I know it's the most fun if we don't get all uptight about every little detail, and since I have my pattern taped in place, I know that I can find anything that I might lose if I'm being a little too casual. So I just don't worry, I just relax and think about how I want the light to hit. And as I lose color out of my brush each time I load it, as I'm losing color, then I'm coming out to a soft disappearing edge. So just by the way that we handle the brush, we can control a lot. For instance, in the light area, right up on his little forehead here, when I first load the brush, I could start right in the middle of that. That's where my strongest paint will be. And then as I'm losing color out of the brush, I can just drift out into the surrounding area. So I am controlling things just a little. And I'm even coming back now with a second application. It's usually easier to build things in stages and not worry too much about getting everything right just in the very beginning. And he might have a little bit of light up on his shoulder here. All kind of nice and fuzzy. I'm going to let some of this background, or this, just the stain of the wood, show through to be a body color for the bear. So I don't have to cover all that up. I'm just going to actually let it work for me. And I want to add some shadows then that will give me even a stronger feeling for the shape that the little bear is taking. I can look on the finished painting or on the drawing and I can see where some of the darker areas might be. For instance, where his ear goes up into shadow. Maybe a little shadow that separates the ear from the head. And I'm not worrying too much with the finished look. I want to just suggest these shadows, knowing that I can come back with another layer, and each layer adds interest. And each layer can slightly change position so that if I don't get quite where I want, then my next layer, which might be a little darker, could change position. And so that way it just gradually builds into a very interesting, funny little bear. We have lots of bears at our house, and they all seem to have their own personalities. And I think there's nothing quite so much fun as painting a grumpy little bear or a sleepy little bear. One of the things I like to mention when I'm painting is that it's always a good idea to choose the largest brush that you can be comfortable with, because it loosens up the painting. It will be much softer. It also makes painting more fun because you just don't have to spend so much time loading, and you can cover a lot more ground. I think our paintings, if we begin to get in a fight with things and we're not really enjoying it, you can tell it in the painting. So you need to be able to feel like you're enjoying and having a good time as you paint. For me, part of that is just having a nice, big, friendly brush and no particular rules. That's why I like to start without a pattern. I could just have the least amount of pattern to start with, because I know that gives me a certain freedom as I'm painting. And also sometimes little happy accidents will happen when you're painting, and if you're just paying attention, you can use those things that come into your painting. He's got some more shadows around on his body, so I'm just going to continue. I always, as I'm loading this brush, I'm side loading the color, and I'm always using the clear water side of my brush to soften the edges of the colors that I'm laying down. so that the paint side of my brush right now is where I want the darkest color to be, right next to his paws. And then as I move out, I just let the clear water side of my brush leave that soft disappearing edge. There are a few things I'd like to say about side loading because I consider that to be probably the most important thing that we use, the most important technique that seems to come into play, at least with the way I like to paint. A correctly side-loaded brush moves from the paint side into a clear water side. And one of the first things is that there has to be a correct amount of water in the brush. A brush that's too wet will not side load easily. The paint will explode across to the other side. And if your brush is too dry and you've lost too much water, you can side load, but you can't really get the paint to go anywhere for you. So I have chosen a fairly large brush, which is much easier to keep side loaded than a small brush would be. I'm going to moisten it in water and then I'll blot briefly on a damp paper towel, and I'm dipping just one corner of the brush into paint, and that is going to be my side loading track. As I want the color to move across the brush, I just keep blending here a little bit. In order to keep the clean side of the brush from having too much paint in it, as I'm blending, I'm putting pressure on that side of the brush so that I can actually scoop up paint on the paint side and keep the clear water side fairly clean. When I want more than one color side loaded into the brush, I'll start with my first color choice, and then for instance, if I wanted to darken that, I will pick up a little darker paint on the very same corner, and I come right back to that track and I blend again. So then we're ready to paint. And in the beginning, the shadows might not appear as smooth. The first layer might not, as if I wait for another layer to develop. They begin to soften and look a little more relaxed. So you don't have to worry if they're just a little messy right now. That's probably good because it adds interest. The texture of the brush strokes can add interest. And I just work with this step until I feel like I maybe don't know quite where to go next, and that usually is a good clue that I'm ready to stop and do something different, and that would be probably to put the remainder of my pattern on. Also, it's a good thing to get back from your painting just a little bit, so I might want to step back and just see how he's looking. Because sometimes things that look right when you're close upon them don't look as good when you get back a little. And we often think to pour just a cup of tea or coffee and just sit back from your painting a little bit and kind of analyze how you like it, how it's going. I can see some places for some stronger darks. They don't all have to go in right now. I just work as long as it feels comfortable, and when I start to dither around about it, I know I'll be changing. I also want to fill in the little oval that's behind the in sign. And then we're going to let all of this dry a minute until the pattern can go on. If you don't want to wait for it to dry, you can use the hair dryer. I'm going to put the remainder of the pattern on. I'm happy with his little tummy like it is, so I can put even the lettering across the front of that, and I'll put the lettering that goes on to the end sign. And all of the facial features and lines, I always say when it comes to putting pattern on, we only need enough that helps us. Anything that we put on that we could better freehand just becomes kind of a hindrance. So I'll put on just the lines that I feel like I need to have right now, and then we'll be ready to paint again. I've replaced the pattern now, or transferred the part of the pattern that I feel like I want. And what I like to do is, with a very thinned amount of color, I'm using just a light brown, I've thinned it with some water, I'm going to sketch in those features, make sure that they're pleasing to me, and until that time I like to keep them really light and easy to change. Bears can be all different personalities, so it doesn't have to look just like the one we did before. They do all seem to take their own personality. He's got some little light brows there. And this bear is just having one of those tired, sleepy days. I'm just lightly sketching in where the deepest part of the nose will be. I like, when I'm doing something like this, always to leave a little of the underpainting showing as a natural highlight, so I don't really paint that in solid. It's much easier to leave some of that natural underpainting show and then add highlight on top of that. It's just easier to get an interesting look, because all of these little subtle changes and variations of color are what add interest. And I love their sweet little mouth, especially when they're having a sleepy day. As I like a shape or a look, I'll begin to deepen it just a little. The secret is staying light until you like it, because then it's so easy to make those little changes and get things to look. On the bears, I often do a little bit of sketching too, just a little bit of fruffy little fur here and there, but trying never to outline. I don't like them to have that outlined look, but this is just little accents here and there. I love paintings that have a sketch-like quality to them. And I'm searching out some of those darkest areas that I know I want to really be important in strengthening them. You know, he had some paws here somewhere. Might give him some little claws too. When the bear begins to take shape, I get some of the significant pattern lines touched back in. Then I like also to do a little bit of the shading, the more controlled type of shading, and I often do that with a liner. Starting very delicate in the beginning, and sometimes when I know I'm going to be working with shadows and I don't want them to have that liner-like quality, I'll pre-moisten an area so that when I come to it, the paint can just soften and sort of melt down in. That color is a little too strong for where I'm trying to put it. So these big shadows, these big kind of make him look sort of rumply shadows, can be sketched in with your liner over a damp surface. Sometimes I'll tap that with my finger, or if you'd rather, you can side load and float those in, and I usually do a little of both. If I'm working with a liner and it feels good, I often don't think to put it down. And I will continue and build a few shadows. I'm also going to fill in the lettering, and I want it to be interesting, so often I'll do a light sketch and then I'll come back and darken it. I like to make sure that I like the shapes that I've gotten. Sometimes when I transfer, I'm a little wobbly. So I'll do a light sketch, and when I like the shape and the look, then I can come back and deepen it. And we could all snuggle in for a little bit while I finish out these letters. So I finished sketching in some of the shadows just softly. I finished the letters, and I'm kind of liking the look. When you feel that you're happy with the expression that you're getting and the look, then it's time to add to build a little more of your darks, the stronger darks. And this is where I'm using my strongest darks for the painting. I'm going to accent the eyes and just around the nose a little bit. And then I'll come and just catch just a few little significant areas where I want to have a little stronger impact. And you can come back to this as often as you want, so it doesn't all have to be done at once. I just try to break it down that way. And usually, pretty much, I know when I'm ready for this depth of color. Each time I'm getting darker, the area of color that I'm covering is generally getting a little bit smaller, so that the early colors show, and we're just accenting them just a little. I don't always work that much with the liner either. Sometimes it's just faster. The bear now can have some stronger shadows built in on the shadow side, and I need these to be dry a little, and I think they are. Shadow doesn't have to just go in a specific area. I can cast a whole large part of the bear into shadow, and since that's transparent color, the underlying detail that we put in will still remain visible. And I'm getting ready then for some bright little highlights on him. This bear looks like he's really having a tired day. We didn't get to bed early enough, the bear and I. There's a little place I need a little more shadow at the back of his paw. And maybe down. You can play with these a lot. This is a really easy technique for painting the little bear. It's always good to remind yourself to stop before you think everything is perfect. We often try so hard to make things so nice that we lose the spontaneity and the fun. And truly, a painting that we've not struggled over quite so much will be a lot more interesting and fun for the viewer to watch. The highlights come on just like, I always like to say it's like a wedding cake. Each layer of color might get a little smaller and a little more important. So as I'm coming up for highlights now, I'm going to place them a little stronger and brighter. That'll be more important. And I'm also going to be a little smaller in area. You could stipple this if you wanted. I like stippling is more tedious to me. It's just more fun if I'm painting just with my brush. And sometimes off the corner of the brush, I will add just a little bit of stippling. always say that's guilt by association. If you see just a little bit of that soft, furry look, then your mind sort of fills in the rest. So we don't have to paint every little fluffy detail. I honestly think the bears stay softer if we do a little less. I like to say too that when I'm painting, because I love bears, it's easy for me. But if you'll think of good thoughts, somebody sweet, someone you love, something happy, then your bear is just going to be a lot more fun to look at. So we have to get ourselves in sort of a cheered up state of mind. And painting should do that for us. I think painting, if we're painting with the freedom and fun instead of the thought of perfection, then we are a little more cheerful. I'll just run a little bit of highlight right down the middle of his arm there. And maybe as I get into the darker areas, I need to always remember to get a little darker color because it needs to be color that feels comfortable. If I try to put something down and it's feeling chalky, I know that I'm a little too light. So I just get a little darker color and it starts to feel more comfortable, and then I know I'm back in the right range again. At the same time that I darken the eyes and the nose, these significant darks, that might be a good time to also balance the sign, the lettering for Snuggle. I have just a place or two on his nose that I'd like to float some richer color. I did most of that sketch work with my liner brush, and now I want to just switch to the flat brush and just fill in. Some of that earlier sketch will still show through, but this sort of unifies it, gives him a little more interesting nose. And I might decide to put this little shadow. Looks sort of like a French mustache, but I always see that on my little bears. They have this little nice shadow that curves around. So I've shaded the letters darker now to bring it into balance with the color that we did up on the eyes and nose. So we're working over the whole painting to keep it in harmony, in balance. And also I filled in with a little dirty red the lettering down here because I wanted to show you a shadow in a minute. I'm going to talk about color glazes that I often do. Glazing means using transparent color over dried paint. And we're making our colors transparent by just adding a little water to them. Today, I usually start with something warm, and I start over on the warm side of the bear. So I've picked up a little bit of yellow and red together. Vermilion's one of my favorites. And I'm just going to put some warm, interesting color glazes. There's no really right or wrong place. I think the key is just not to overdo, because I generally like them better if I don't do too much. And as I get a little of that color on there, then I like to begin to shift. So I might try a little, adding a little more red, or coming down the palette just to getting some deeper colors. This is all just what you like. We're different with color. We all feel differently about color. And I tend to love vermilion. Anything that's got a lot of orange is good. But see how pretty it is when I add some of the Napthol red in. And you get this richer, it's very rich. So I could make him really colorful, lots of little glints of color, or I can leave him with a lot of the brown showing. And I paint with a lot of brown too. This doesn't all have to be done at once, and Actually, all of the things that we have done, you can come back to any step, I think, at any time. I like to paint economically so that I'm not just coming back and back and back, but if I can get something to work the first time, I'll let it. If not, I'll work a little longer. So some days you just get it faster than others. At the same time, while I'm working on the bear, I'm watching because I want the whole piece to come into harmony. It seems like it might be interesting now if I would lighten just a little bit and bring up a little of the highlight that's actually outside and around the bear. I want just a little bit lighter than that. I always try, the lights dry darker. They seem to go away more than any other color. By adding this little bit of accent behind, I'm making the bear more interesting, making him come forward. And I'm still trying to avoid outlining him. So I'm filling in more triangular shaped areas than skinny areas. I want fat triangular shaped areas. And we can bring some of this color, I want just a little darker, but often I'll bring a little bit of that color right in onto the bear, just like a cool secondary highlight. I can use it to soften just the edge where his fur meets the background. Sometimes I like to lose a little detail, or I can just use it wherever I think a little cool reflected light might go. I've started the sketch that comes and kind of frames him in, and I'm just going to finish. And I finished the little cool lights that I place around on the little bear. So looking at the piece as a whole, I might want to come down now and pull the end sign in just a little bit. It needs a little shadow around the outer edge, and I am just side loading. And I think to adjust that color a little bit. As I'm coming around here, sometimes it's hard to come all the way around without making a funny stop and start place. So I can just stop where it feels comfortable and let that dry, and then I can come back and fill in another layer and complete this second section. There's also a little dark trim line that comes around the edge of that. I'll go ahead and put it on now, even though I may have to touch it up if I want to come back and do some more shadows. It helps to take a nice deep breath before you do something like that. Kind of steady yourself. But I don't worry too much about perfection. I really like things that aren't so perfect. I'm going to sketch a little bit of shadow down the top of these letters. One thing I've always noticed is if I try to do something all at once, it's usually not as pleasing to look at as if I can do 2 or 3 layers. Then it's always easier for me to get a nice finished look. So I can come back to any of these areas with maybe just a second layer a little later that will help it out a little bit. I'm looking at the completed bear painting, and at the demonstration that we're doing today, we're very close to a finished look. The difference would be that I might have worked a little longer on the board and developed it a little bit more, but the steps are the same. You don't change the steps. So if you want to go back to something even like adding highlights, you can come back, you can deepen shadows, and build on as much as you want to get the look that you want. I always think just stop before I've done too much, but so I like often the softness of a demonstration painting better than the actual original piece, because I don't try to work quite as hard on them. I just realize that I didn't need to do so much, and sometimes they're just better if we let them be just soft and a little understated. So I think to finish up the bear today, I might deepen some of the shadows, maybe add a little bit more glaze, rich, transparent glaze colors. But basically, I'm going to leave him pretty much just like he is. Call this a finished bear. And then if you like stippling, you could have a little bit more stippled highlights on him. I can almost hear him snoring now, or maybe that could be the people in the audience today. I'm going to finish just a little of the shadow down around the oval. And I think it's surprising to me how easy it is to make a bear look soft and cuddly. I think it's more with the broad placement of color than with really tight detail. And it's just those nice big shadows that come in the fur. But thank you for painting with me today.
Shirley thanks you for spending this time with her and hopes you've enjoyed this lesson. All of Shirley's designs, books, pattern packets, and videos are available from Ladybug Art Center. For a complete color catalog, call 1-800-304-2787 or write P.O. Box 4159, Springfield, Missouri 65808.